Welcome back to the fourth episode of Learn Codea by Making a Game. In this episode, we will be working on coin collecting. As you saw there, we made the knight run into the coin, and as you see over here, a coin just spawned. So we'll also be working on coin spawning. So let's get started. Okay, the first thing we want to do is open the project from last time. Before we actually start writing code, let's actually see how collisions work in Codea. Let's add the scene that we have currently. So right now, what we have done is add a physics body to the entity. This allows them to move and it's been very useful. But if we actually want them to have collisions, we need to add something called a collider. As you can see, we added a red square around each of the entities. This is what we call a box collider, and this allows us to collide the collision boxes together. The size of the box is 1 unit by 1 unit. This is because the size of the knight and coin is 1 unit by 1 unit. But if we actually move the knight close to the coin, we will notice that the coin and knight actually collide with one another even without them touching. This is because the box is too big for them. So what we're going to do is shrink the box by half on the x-axis and half on the y-axis. But as you can see, the collider is no longer touching the foot of the knight. This is where we want the collision to happen. So what we have to do is move the collision box down by 1/4 of a unit. Now the collision boxes look fine. Now it's time for us to add colliders to the entities. The first thing I did was to add an extra properties when setting up our scenes. This property is the physics.debug, and what we do is set it to true. This will allow us to see the physics colliders which we are setting up. The next thing I did was to assign the physics body which we created before, and we're going to now assign that to a local variable called body. Next thing we do is create a box collider by calling the box function that is inside of the body, and what we put as a parameter is the size of the box, which is half a unit, and we assign that to a collider variable. What I do next is to move the collider down by 1/4 of a unit, just like what we did in the animation. And afterwards, the body, what we do is we set it to fixed rotation because we don't want the body to be able to rotate. We do the same thing for the coin entity, but instead of having a fixed rotation, we set the collider to be a sensor. Making it into a sensor means we're able to pass through it. This is useful for stuff that we're going to be able to pass through, but we do want to check a collision. Now let's go and run the project. If you see, when we walk around, we see this collider around the knight, this box collider, and we also see the same collider for the coin. But what we want is when we collide with the coin, we want it to actually, disappear and make a sound. So what we're going to do is create a class that can help us deal with that. Okay, let's begin by writing the coin class. This is the final result that we have. In the creative function, we assign a variable called onCompleteFunction to nil, and we also get the animator. And the way we get the animator of the entity is by writing entity and then get and then the sprite animator. This is the update function, but we won't look into it until a little later. The next function we have is collision begin 2D. This function is something special. This function is called whenever a collision happens, and it takes in a collision as a parameter. The first thing we do in this function is use that collision parameter to get the other entity that was collided with. So we get the coin and we want to check whatever was collided with the coin, which should be the player. So if we check in the if statement, we notice that the other entity dot name is equal to player. This is so we can check if the entity where we collided is the player. If the condition passes, then we play the die animation and we set a variable called call collected to true. And what we do is we turn off the physics body. That way we won't have a collision. And the way we do that is by writing entity body 2D, and then we make the enable to be disabled by setting it to false. And what we're going to do next is play a sound. The last function we have is onCollect. This is basically a setter method which allows us to set the onCollected function and play it whenever the coin is collected. If we go back to the update method, we check if the call collected, which we set to true in the collision begin function, and we check if that is true. And if it's true, we call the onCollected function. Then we set call collect to be equal to nil. Okay, let's go back to the main file. And let's add this line of code, which basically adds the coin component, and let's run the project. Now, if we run into the coin, you'll see that it makes a sound and it plays the die animation, but we notice something that's very strange. The die animation runs like multiple times, and also the coin has not been deleted, since we still see that square over there, meaning the coin is not destroyed. So we want to add an ability to basically just play the animation once, and also the ability to just, once the animation finishes, then we just destroy the entity. Okay, we're gonna go back to the Sprite Animator component which we wrote before, and we're gonna update it and add new functions. If we go back to the creator function, we see that we added two new variables, one called loop num, which is equal to nil, and another called onComplete function, which is also equal to nil. Each time we run the play function, we set them to equal to nil again. We create a new function called loop, which just sets the num variable from the creator function. The other function is called onComplete, which does the same thing as the loop, but for the onComplete function. In the update function, we replace the code that said current frame number equal to 1, and we'll replace it instead with a function called handle loop. In that function, we basically check if loop num is existing, and if it is, then we run the code below. If not, then we set frame number to equal to 1. If loop number is existing, meaning that we can loop, then what we do is reduce the loop number by 1, and if the loop number equals 0, meaning that if we finish the loop, then we call the onComplete function, and then we set playing to equal to false. But if the loop number is not equal to 0, then we just set the current frame to be 1. Let's go back to the coin file and let's add the loop and onComplete function to the animator. So in the loop function, we loop the animation once, and once the loop ends on the onComplete function, what we do is we destroy the entity using entity.destroy. Okay, let's now run the project. And as you see, when we collide the knight and the coin, the animation of the coin plays once and it destroys. The way we know it's destroyed is because the square is gone. But one thing is, like you'll notice, is that it's gone and we have nothing more to do. So what I want to do now is the ability to spawn coins. So if we destroy one, another one will spawn, and it will just keep doing it over and over again. So that's what we want to do. We're going to work on a coin spawner. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is create the coin spawner. So first thing we want to do is set up all the stuff. So we're going to create a new class, call it coin spawner, and once we've done that, we'll clear up everything that's inside of the file, and we'll paste in this line of code, which basically just adds the created function and a new function which we have called coin spawn coin. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the main function, the main file, and we're going to take this line of code and cut it, and then we're going to paste the coin down here, and afterwards we'll start writing the coin spawner. But before we write the coin spawner, let's explain how it works. So the way the coin spawner will work is that it will have a certain area where the coin can be spawned. When the player goes and touches a coin, it will destroy that coin, and it should spawn another coin inside that same area. We will have to keep account of the size of the coin. We don't want a coin to be sticking outside of the area. We want it to be contained inside of the area. Though there is one problem while spawning the coin. The problem is we might spawn a coin right on top of the player, and we don't want that to happen. So the way we're going to fix that is by making a little distance around the player, which we don't want coins to spawn. Okay, let's now update the coin spawner file and add extra stuff we need. In the creator function, we have a variable called area size and distance, which these two will be the size and distance of what we need. And we spawn a coin at x equals 5 and y equals -2, and we have a variable called score, which we set to 0. This will be the amount of coins we've collected. In the spawn coin function, what we do is we have a parameter which is the position of which we want to spawn the coin, but this is an optional parameter and not required. The first thing we do is create the coin entity, then we get the player by writing scene.player. Remember, player is the name that we set before for the knight, so we use that name to get the player. Next variable we have is the coin size, which we just set to 1. In the if statement, we check if the position variable was actually set, and if it is, we set the coin position to be the position which was set in the parameters. If not, we use the repeat until loop to continually spawn a coin in a random position, and we will repeat until the distance from the coin and the player is greater than the distance which we set in the creator function. This repeat until loops takes account of the area size, so we want to make sure that the random position fits inside of the area size, and we also take account of the coin size, meaning that we want it to actually fit inside of the area size. We don't want it to be on top of the area size, we want it to be inside of the area size. Next things we do is just set up the animator and the physics body, which we did before, after which we add the coin component, and we assign that component to a variable. We'll set the uncollected function. This function will spawn a new coin and raise the score by 1. Okay, let's go back to the main file. And what we're going to add is these lines of code, which adds the coin spawner entity and adds the coin spawner component and sets the size of the component like area to 14 by 8, so that will be the width of the area, and then the height of the area, and this 4 will be the distance which the coins will be spawned around in that area. And if we run the project and we collide the coin and the knight together, we'll see that a new coin appears each time we make a collision, which is very nice. But we might notice that the physics debug drawer is still drawing those squares, so we're still seeing the hitboxes. And if we want to remove them, we'll just go back and comment this line of code, and let's rerun it. And as you can see, there's no more lines of code, and we can make our no of these boxes, and now we can make our collisions and it works fine. That about wraps up this episode. In the next episode, we will be working on tile maps, and what we will be doing is building a little map around here that we can have our knight to be running around, so we don't have this boring purple screen. So please subscribe and like and share, and have a nice day.